everyone. Bonjour à tout le monde. Euh, Ravi d'être à nouveau pour ce deuxième jour avec vous. Bon, les gens vont se connecter au fur et à mesure ce matin, mais on va pas forcément, je dirais, attendre que tout le monde soit là. Donc, on va démarrer la présentation qui est prévue ce matin. Euh, Good morning, Andre. We had a very interesting day yesterday, and we are waiting for your presentation.
Perspective on what is currently being done in terms of European initiatives, especially on third countries, Africa, of course, included. And so this is to give, let's say, a bit of the policy background. And the big difference that we currently see in the European, but also other countries' initiatives, let's say, along critical raw materials and critical raw material supply chains. And maybe to start with, because I know we had a conference last year at Africa Indaba, and Nelly Mutemeri, but also others pointed out that in Africa, the word critical raw materials isn't, very much popular. For one thing, it's the word raw, because of course Africa is really on a way to leave the status to become a raw material supplier, but rather to at least export processed materials. So this is totally independent. CRM is really, let's say, a European parlance to just distinguish this set of metals and materials, let's say, from precious metals. But having said this, the difference that we see now is that when we normally talk about gold and gold demand, let's say, for the next 5 or 10 years, this is always attached, of course, to the economic situation, to inflation, to global insecurity. When we talk about copper demand, copper is, of course, let's say, one of the metals which is mostly used in almost any economic activity from lower and middle and high income countries alike. But it's still a bit speculative, because you always need to apply, let's say, the overall economic development scenarios in order to come up with a scenario about, let's say, copper or zinc demand for the next 5 or 10 years. Here, it's really, we have a legal basis for a lot of the demand that we see in battery metals and other critical raw materials. And the first, and this is the graphic on the left, the green one, it's the European deal that comes with a whole set of underlying regulations and imperatives. But of course, the goal is to reach this 2050 net zero status. That doesn't mean complete annihilation of any, let's say, fossil fuels, but it's the net that counts. And out of that, there's a couple of EU level regulations, or laws indeed, acts as it's called in the EU. First and foremost, it's the Net Zero Industry Act, but it's also the Critical Raw Material Act. And those, as well as others, translate into national level laws. So we have national energy legislations, and we have binding reduction targets. And as the Commission's president below says, the Net Zero Industry Act will go hand in hand with the Critical Raw Materials Act. And the core of the CRM Act is really to streamline CRM production in Europe, but also in, let's say, befriended third countries, in partnership countries. So this process here, basically the transition stage from a largely fossil fuel-based economy in terms of transport, energy, etc., to a largely,
we lost you for a second.
Oh, where was the last one? So to wrap up this slide, we have binding targets that are politically binding, and those politically binding targets basically translate into demand scenarios, because from this one, so when we say we want to largely leave the fossil-based economy and largely go into a electricity-based economy, which again is powered largely by CRMs, then we can take a next step and say, okay, at the moment, for instance, when we look at the energy transition part, we know part of the energy transition will come from solar powered and part comes from wind power. Of course, we also have water. We also have other forms of so-called clean energy, but largely it will be those two. And then you can basically say, okay, when we need to transform coal-powered and nuclear-powered, maybe nuclear-powered less, because most countries will keep that, except Germany indeed. But we still can quite much calculate the required increase in on and offshore wind capacity. And on the left graph, we can see a low and a middle and a high demand scenario. And out of that, you can basically calculate down again the required increase in the input raw materials, because wind energy, of course, every wind generator has the permanent magnets that are based on a combination of rare earth and iron and borax. And so you can then again calculate the increase of those ingredients, CRM from 2020 to 2030, and indeed also for 40 and up to 50. So again, the difference is that these increases in demand are legally based. So it's not only a speculative scenario as you usually have, but it's to follow, to make countries follow the legal obligations, basically. And you can do this as well for the other key ingredients in this graph, which only looks complex, but is in fact quite easy. So in the middle column, you have, let's say, the key appliances to ensure the energy transition: batteries, fuel cells, wind generation, traction motors, PV, maybe robotics, etc. It's a bit less. And then the renewables and e-mobility sector. And then you can make the transgression lines in the main CRMs that are required for that. So light rare earth, heavy rare earth, magnesium, niobium, etc. And then derive through other, let's say, underlying data, the supply risk scenario. And I mean, very high, and moderate, you can see is quite often. Interestingly, in this report, nickel and copper are considered to be of low supply risk, but that seems to be a bit weird, I think, for many people who work in the sector, because while there's a lot of copper, copper is also needed in a lot of other applications, except renewables and e-mobility. So I think the very low supply risk scenario is a bit optimistic, at least for these two metals. And then, of course, you also need to look at the supply. And what we see here is basically supply control of European supply, first along raw materials, so unprocessed, and then on processed materials, looking at batteries, lithium batteries for cathode, anode, and electrolyte production. And from a European perspective, this is a bit devastating to look at, because you can see in raw material supply, it's very low, and it's not looking much better in processed materials. This graphic, I think, has the caveat that it doesn't really take into account current European reserves and resources, because I think until 2010 there was little exploration activity for CRM in Europe, lithium included. It's now really over the last 5 years, it's increasing massively. So that figures probably will change in terms of raw materials. It will be more than 1 and 2, but it will still not be 30 and 50%. It will increase somewhat. And this is also part of the Critical Raw Materials Act, that mining is also coming back to Europe. There is no doubt. There's a lot of activity on streamlining permitting process, on streamlining ESG, on streamlining finances, etc. But still, nevertheless, one will need to acknowledge that supply will be limited in Europe. It will look better than this, but not perfect. So there's, I think, a clear need to look at third-party, country partnerships. And I found this quite interesting. So this is a presentation from 2020. And that says, until 2030, the European Union needs to import increasing share of strategically relevant materials from various countries, including or particularly China and Russia. Since 2020, Russia basically broke away. It didn't decrease to zero. So nickel imports from Russia, for instance, are still quite strong. But let's say it has been severely cut. No one knows how long this will take, but that only means that from a European perspective, dependence on China has increased. So there again, I think we see a clear political imperative to reach out to other third countries to basically supplement this situation. So supply risk are, as the previous slide showed, is geographic concentration. Resource nationalism can have many phases. I mean, it sounds very negative in a way, but it's a clear policy by countries. When prices for the minerals increase, countries try to get a bigger share and more favorable conditions, which is I think fair to say. So it shouldn't have necessarily this negative annotation. But we see that a lot of African countries, for instance, implemented an export moratorium for unprocessed minerals and metals. Lithium, I think, is banned to be exported unprocessed in Namibia, and Zimbabwe, cobalt in DRC, and I think there's many others in a lot of countries. But of course, at the moment, it's an added supply risk. What I mean by non-market mechanisms is that a lot of CRMs are not traded on the open market, but rather you have contracts between the producer, the mine, and the buyer, the end user. And often, of course, this is sidelined by, let's say, political negotiations, which of course open up a kind of a race for resources between competing countries. And of course, we have ESG standards, which are getting more and more complex, and you have an increasing number of standards and an increasing, let's say, insecurity often by importing or end users to navigate through this jungle. And it is especially challenging for the finance industry, which is hypersensitive on ESG requirements. So that's the first presentation. The European perspective. I don't know, Jean-Pierre, if I should just follow suit with the next one immediately, or some break, some questions. Any? Yes.
Can you hear me?
Edem, I can.
Okay. Edem, you have a question?
Yes, I do.
I stopped that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So my question
go
is,
ahead, Edem.
Okay. So good morning, everyone. So my question is,
okay. So Edem, if you cannot speak, difficult to hear you.
Hello. Can you hear me,
Andre?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Go
yes.
ahead.
Okay. So I'm saying that when you were speaking, you were saying you made mention
go
of
ahead.
Resource
Go ahead,
nationalization.
Yeah.
Yes. So my question is,
so
in your experience,
I think Andre, can you hear me?
No, I can also hear Edem. I can hear Edem loud and clear.
I cannot. My side, I cannot hear. Okay, so je remets le son. Tu coupes tout de ton côté. Hello, can you hear me, Andre?
Yes, I can.
Can you hear me, Andre?
I can.
Okay, so Edem, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, but it seems you can't hear me.
Okay, I think you can ask your question. Edem, go ahead.
Okay, so my question to Andre is, how, in your opinion, how do you think these African countries can and their European counterparts can maximize the full benefits of their resources, considering that over the years, for the past few years, we've seen a rise in resource nationalism from these African countries, especially in countries where there have been some military takeovers, where military governments wants to keep majority of their resources and institute a lot of resource nationalism policies. How do Europe and Africa make sure that there's a win-win situation where Africa benefits and Europe benefits? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a pertinent question, and basically also a question that is, being asked and discussed in almost any African-related mining conventions. Not only the last years, but when we were talking about beneficiation and value added, it's a few years old indeed, this discussion. So I think you need to consider two sides. I think for Europe, as I mentioned, the partnerships, and I will explain that more in the second presentation. So there is a number of partnerships between the EU and third countries. Namibia, for instance, has been the first one in Africa where this partnership has been signed. And in this partnership, the partner country is quite free to formulate, what it seeks from this partnership. And I think in almost all cases, it will be for the country to participate more along the value chain. So basically set up a processing industry, if you so want. And this is something where Europe, I think, can be the partner, not only with capital, but also with knowledge, with education. For example, one of EIT's partner, so we work in a partner network, is the University of Tallinn in Estland, that has set up a master course for future Namibian business leaders. Not only focusing in the mining industry, but also focusing on the mining industry. So if you, let's say, consider the education part and the innovation part, and that could, for instance, work through joint ventures, then I think it also makes sense to follow this kind of mineral-induced industrialization that also the Economic Commission of Africa has formulated many years ago. But of course, you always need a business case. But I think we do have this business case now, because of the CRM situation. And, I think that's beneficial for Europe when it can collaborate in industrial terms with other countries, and it would be beneficial for Africa. I mean, this process won't happen overnight. That's also clear, because you need to, set up many things, many institutions. A whole new level of, I think, education and skills need to be in place. So that takes some time. But I think Europe is willing to do that, and I also sense that Africa is quite open to do that.
Andre, another question, my side.
Yes.
I think I had different comments. One comment, when you show the map regarding the raw materials and processed materials, my observation here is that Africa is not on your map. We talk about, a lot of for the processed material. So, I think this is maybe the challenge for Africa. And then
Yes.
two questions. Do you think the Russian situation, the relationship between Europe and Russia could be an opportunity for Africa on your side? I mean, at the European Union level, what's the view of this? And then, okay, maybe we come back to the risk that are identified on your map, because you showed a map that is, I think, very politically correct, right? Everything is in green all over the world for
Yes.
the risk. So please comment this if you can.
Yeah, I think the situation between Europe and Russia, of course, yes, it will even shift, as I said, a bit more the way to. I said China in my presentation because, of course, China is the one where, at least with regard to process capacity, you have the highest levels of capacity. But it's not really positive for Europe to become even more dependent on one particular country. And the Critical Raw Materials Act, by the way, formulates that for any given mineral or metal, there should be a maximum of 60% based on one country. Of course, this number is very, I don't know, probably they threw dice. I mean, it could also be in 50 or 70. It doesn't really matter. But I think the implication behind is that Europe really needs to work to reduce dependency on one country. And absolutely. I mean, this new initiatives that you have vis-a-vis Africa, but also Latin America is also clearly reinforced through the current relationships with Russia. That's absolutely clear. And what you said, Africa is not on the map. You probably mean with, on the processing capacity. But it's also true because there is little at the moment. But this is exactly also what I think Edem's question was aiming at. This is something that needs to change. And basically every, I said in every mining conference, so whenever you have a government representative, they are very clear to point out that this needs to change. And then we are back to the first question. I think we have a window of opportunity that really needs to be, used. But as I said, from the European side, in formulating these partnerships, there is a clear openness and willingness to do that.
Thank you, André. Very interesting. Une question pour André, en français ou en anglais. Donc, voilà, je vous rappelle, hein, pour ceux qui viennent d'arriver, André représente l'Union européenne, en fait, ici, et la politique que l'Europe a en matière de métaux critiques. Je suis sûr que, Asdine, tu as une question par rapport à la RDC. Ou alors, si tu l'as pas, c'est moi qui la pose. Andre, a question about DRC, because we have one of our colleagues here is in DRC at the moment, and of course we are very interesting in the perception people have at the European level. What's the perception of DRC as a country, a potential supplier? Can you answer this question?
I hope so. I just wanted to clarify that ERT Raw Materials is not the EU, but it's an EU body, which might sound the same, but it's not. I don't know if you have this separate presentation, but let's say we are associated and we are largely funded by the European Commission, but administratively is separate. So, and I think the biggest difference is that we don't really do policy. And this is why I cannot, fully basically replicate the official EU perspective. But I can say our perspective from ERT. So, of course, DRC is an imminent mining country, not only on cobalt, but of course, copper and a lot of others, but it's a key player in cobalt. And with the next presentation, this project is also really looking at the smaller scale and indeed small scale mining side, which is a big factor in Congolese cobalt production, as everyone knows. Of course, there's a lot of large scale mining for cobalt. But I think if you want to secure or improve access to critical raw materials, then you have to talk about cobalt. And if you have to talk about cobalt, you have to talk about DRC. There's no way around it. DRC, in fact, is upcoming as a partnership country with the EU. I don't think it has been signed yet, but it's in the advanced negotiation stage. And I'm pretty sure that we will have a partnership between CRM partnership between the EU and DRC, surely within 2024. And then again, so a partnership is just a document, right? But then you have a roadmap to implement the partnerships. And then, so this is really to implement a couple of really important points. They can be trade policy, education, whatever, because each roadmap is individual. But I think this will, let's say, set the partnership, at least as far as mining is concerned, between DRC and Europe on a new level.
Thanks a lot, Andre. Very interesting. It's a good transition to talk about the Malaval project. Can you make it in 10 minutes? So we are the quarter.
Yeah, I think I can do that.
Maximum, including.
Okay, so
we
will...
at a quarter to 11. Quarter to.
Okay.
Quarter to 11. We move to the next.
Okay, so I do this presentation. Did I share my screen? Can you see it?
Not yet. Can you share it?
Yes. Okay, then I forgot.
Not shared.
I think now it is. Yeah, okay, it's shared. I just don't see my. I don't see the presentation that I wanted to give. Let me just do it this way. Give me a minute, please. Okay, now it's there. Okay, I think now you should see it. Correct? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can see.
Okay, very good. So this is this is a presentation about an EU-funded project which is implemented by EAT Raw Materials, but other consortium partners. I'm going to talk about it quickly, and it's called Building EU-Africa Partnerships on Raw Material Value Chains, Africa Maval in short. And I think, as you said, Jean-Pierre, it fits to what was discussed previously. So that's the full name. It is granted by the European Commission. It's 1.5 years old, and it's running at least until November 2025 with a total of 9 million euros. And we have an interesting consortium consisting of European and African partners. And even beyond that, so we have universities, we have engineering firms, we have geological surveys, we have BRGM is the coordinating body, which is, of course, I think well known to the audience because they're very active in Africa. We have research university from Namibia, etc. So it's a pretty broad scope that is lending its proficiency into this project. And so the global objectives are obviously, because we're discussing this topic, to basically improve the, basically take care of the twin transition process, which I was explaining in the first presentation. So this is, let's say, the basis why this project has come alive. And then it's basically looking to form partnerships between Europe and Africa along the value chain. So that means everything from exploration to extraction, processing, refining, but also recycling, secondary resources, and indeed small-scale mining and probably even artisanal mining. This is all subject to this partnership project. And of course, it's restricted on the list of critical raw materials. In EU parlance, every 2 years there's a new assessment on what constitutes critical raw materials, and it's basically a mix between scarcity and economic needs. And out of this calculation, you have a list of currently I think it's 22 raw materials, and then there's an extended list which is a bit longer, which then includes also copper, nickel, and tin and manganese. So how this project works, because I said 8 million, of course, obviously 8 million wouldn't be a lot of money when we talk about mining and investing in mining. So this is not what the project does. What it does is that we basically have a research on analysis component. These are the circles, 1 to 4. So we look at the supply potential, and this is where the geological surveys that we have in the project work with other African geological surveys. To basically have an assessment about CRM potential in the countries. So we will have a condensed list of CRM potential. We start with 10 case study countries. I will come to that later. The same is true. So this is, let's say, the underground assessment. Then we also look what is currently happening with regard to CRM value chains above the ground, if you so want. So exploration, starting from early exploration to advanced exploration to current mining to beneficiation to recycling. We also look at the financial environment. So what's in the landscape, what's available, under what conditions in terms of private financing, public financing, etc. And then, of course, because I mentioned it, we also look at ESG. And so through these 4 activities, we have a very dense set of analytical data, which is then basically packaged into investment opportunities. So we kind of have a number of investment projects, which is number 7 on this graph. And then this all will be put, or let's say processed in a digital matchmaking platform, which is going to be developed and hopefully finished end of this year, early next year by the latest. So in this platform, we basically have two sides, if you so want. We have African project owners, and we have the European side. This would be buyers, off-takers, or investors. And then the goal of this project is, as I said, is really to basically produce investable projects and bring them to negotiation between the African side and the European side. And this exchange platform is one of the key outputs of the project. And as I said, there will be industry partners, but also government agencies, finance and legal services, and NGOs. And we have the value chain approach. So clusters of mining activities and operations along the value chains will be taken into account. And while it's clearly focused on deals, it will also help to improve, let's say, broader sector knowledge, broader knowledge about investment opportunities, but also about ESG topics. And I think the value added that we can offer is that this is based on a solid strategy, on a partnership strategy between the EU and Africa, as well as on the availability of pre-analyzed, but this is not total due diligence, I have to point this out, but it's, let's say, pre-analyzed investment opportunities. So at least we will check, whether the data that has been given to us is broadly accurate. And then, of course, because you can't just do mining projects digitally, so we also sideline this with regional level roadshows. I mentioned the case studies. The countries in blue are those countries where we have the analytics, the data being developed first, and all this will be completed by end of the year. And then the project also will be active in the rest of the countries. Just quickly, the outcomes, of course, is to have this sustainable business network, which is alive even after the end of the project in end of 25. ESG, I mentioned that, and to get the comprehensive view of existing mining, processing, and recycling projects, and at least 100 investment opportunities. That's the minimum goal that the project basically has. Right, I think I matched the time. Now it's 45. Good. Good to you.
Can you hear me, Andre?
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much again for the. Oh, can you hear me? No.
I can.
I think.
Yes, Jean-Pierre, on t'entend très bien. On t'entend très bien, il n'y a pas de problème.
J'aurais une question, Jean-Pierre.
Vas-y.
Oui. What is the cumulative investment you wish to generate with the 8 million seed investments that you have?
Good question. It's open. No, there's no ceiling. I mean, this 8 million is really basically used for generating this data that I was telling about in the 4 circles. So it's not to be considered really as seed funding, other than it helps to develop the data and set up this digital platform. And then you're right. I mean, what we also do starting next week at Raw Materials Week in Brussels, and then also continuing in Indaba, is that we also want to bring partners together, because I think the financing environment looks different than a few years ago, because we have much higher interest from, or much higher availability of public finance, especially from the European Commission level. This is also part of the Critical Raw Materials Act. So when you have a strategic project, then there's different, as you said, seed funding options from the European Commission side. So I think, I mean, I cannot give any number, but I think we have more opportunities to trigger private financing into mining projects in Africa than we had a few years ago.
But we may look at the thing the other way around. You know how much critical material or transition metal we need to make the transition. This has been assessed, in your initial slides.
Right.
That you could know the exploration and development effort which is needed in mining to supply Europe. Is there any estimate on that?
Yeah, in fact, I was talking with a colleague this morning, because we had a team meeting here, and he said, to be realistic, I mean, at least is a double-digit billion figure. So if you would set up kind of an investment support fund, for example, to support exploration. I mean, talking about 30, 40, 50 billion is not unrealistic. I mean, it sounds huge.
No,
but if you
it's the
think
kind
about
of
it, exactly,
range.
that probably makes sense. The question if the money is there, because the CRM Act has not been ratified, but I agree that you need to think big, I think, because we have the big competitor of China, which has this amount of money also for, you know, for third country partnerships. And if we continue with small, it will not happen.
And is there any vision in Europe to develop a stock market like there is in Canada or Australia or England, Britain?
I didn't hear about that, but there is for sure there is discussion about several funds. So whether that's for strategic equity, whether that's to promote, let's say, exploration, whether that's even just if you, let's say, you would fund feasibility studies, which is, you know, this big threshold in an exploration project. But that also can cost $10-20 million or euros, which for an exploration company might be a lot or even too much. So I think there's lots of options. In fact, stock market, we have that in London, but that's of course not proper EU. It's an interesting question, but I didn't hear really too much about that. No.
Yeah, I think I mean, the financial authorities should really think about that, because this has been proved to be the best way to develop marketing from scratch. The Chinese are using the Australian and the Canadian stock markets for their own needs.
Yeah,
I agree. I mean, maybe if I can just add, since we're gonna see much more mining and indeed exploration activity in Europe over the next years, so maybe that will give, let's say, the underlying demand pressure to think about in that lines.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you.
Question, Andre. Please, do you think the funds that you've talked about and you know, the early stage funding fund that you talked about, would he fund ESG based trading activity, raw material trading activity? First question. And what would be the ESG you know, focus or expectation from the on the EU side for this kind of activity?
Yeah, good question. I mean, the first one would be too speculative to answer, because so far there has, as I said, been different talks about setting up different funds, but as long as there is no signature by a commissionary to do that, it would be too speculative. I think I really am optimistic that we will see some kind of European Commission level public support for, let's say, mining activities in general within the next month, but I'm not sure how much and where exactly we'll be focusing. But trade might be an option, especially when we talk about, you know, what I maybe forgot to mention specifically, that small scale and artisanal mining is also be part of the Africa Maval network. So that would open up, I think, spaces in looking more deeply into the trade option. And then, sorry, what was the second part?
The ESG,
the ESG,
you know, expectation
exactly.
on ESG.
Right. I think what is totally missing in the ESG discussion is really the African perspective. That's also something that we want to apply more in ESG, because you cannot, you know, apply a smaller scale mine in Eastern DRC to Swiss standards, but this is in a way done if you apply ESG as it is done now. So it's totally impractical. But every African country has a mining code with ESG standards given in that code, and I think at least that should be applied. It sometimes differs from European standards, but I think that's fine. I think we need to be more pragmatic. And if an African legislator thinks that's appropriate, you know, for their country, I think it should also be appropriate for Europe. And I think it's really time to be more pragmatic, especially in ESG, because we are scaring every investor off. We are scaring a lot of European companies off to become active, even in Europe, with the standards as they're applied now.
Thank you very much, Andre. thank you all. Maybe a last question from the public, if any. Okay, so I suggest we move to the next presentation. I'm going to be sharing on my side again so I think you should see my slide. I mean my document. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, so after Andre, so we will hear again Andre in a few minutes. It's your presentation actually. Okay, so let me see.
It's familiar, yes.
Okay, sorry. After you. So now we I propose to hear to listen to Cynthia Borkai from the UMAT. Are you there, Cynthia? Hello, Cynthia. Okay, so maybe it was actually not sure because they did a presentation yesterday, the UMAT, the University of Mines and Technology, and we we discussed about the idea of presenting some opportunities they offer in terms, of course, of education to African students and others that want to study there in Ghana. You know that this country has a great experience in mining management, and so okay, so I understand Cynthia is not there. I want to see the chat. Okay, so we'll have another occasion. On aura une autre occasion pour que Cynthia de l'UMAT au Ghana présente. On va passer à la suivante. Alors, là, je retourne au français parce que on va parler d'une société qui est en fait, on va dire européenne, qui est italienne, mais aussi française puisqu'ils sont présents en France. C'est la société Diem Filtration, représentée par Monsieur Didier Saunier, qui est avec moi ici d'ailleurs à Paris en présentiel. Donc, il va nous faire justement une présentation des solutions, notamment de filtration pour le secteur minier. Et on a trouvé que c'était, je dirais, pertinent de lui proposer ça parce que ça évidemment apporte des idées et des solutions aux problèmes environnementaux dont on a parlé précédemment, enfin dont on a parlé hier notamment. Donc, Didier, je vais te passer la main, enfin tu vas prendre la main plus exactement, je vais arrêter le partage et tu vas pouvoir partager de ton côté la présentation. Donc, monsieur Didier Saunier, qui prend la main. Là maintenant, tu peux reprendre aussi le micro. Il faut que tu ouvres ton doc, par contre. Il est ouvert ton doc?
Non, il n'est pas ouvert. Je suis en train de mettre l'écran.
Ah ouais. Non, mais d'abord le doc.
Ah, mais je peux l'écrire. Voilà.
Voilà, c'est ça. Il faut que tu l'ouvres.
Ok. C'est parti.
C'est bon? Là, tu peux mettre en plein écran ici, en bas. Attends, je vais te laisser. Là, en bas à droite.
Ouais, ça y est. Bonjour à tous.
Donc, je me présente, Didier Saunier, de la société d'infiltration. Nous sommes une société.
Regarde si tout le monde t'entend, déjà.
Est-ce que tout le monde m'entend?
Oui, très bien.
Alors,
C'est bon?
j'ai pas beaucoup de retours. Une personne?
Oui,
Donc,
très
On vous
bien.
entend
Ah,
on vous
ok,
entend très
d'accord.
bien. Allez-y.
Ok. Ok. Donc, je disais, donc, Guillaume Filtration existe depuis 1923. Basé entre Bologne et Ravenne, c'est à 2 heures et demie en dessous de Milan, dans l'Italie du Nord. On a commencé dans le domaine de l'œnologie avec le pressage du raisin. Donc, du raisin, on est arrivé à la filtration du vin. Et dans les années, on va dire 1960-1970, on a surtout développé le filtre presse dans tous les secteurs d'activité pour la séparation liquide solide et la déshydratation des boues. Donc, on est capable de filtrer des pectines en agroalimentaire, donc tout ce qui est à base de pommes ou de citron qui sont utilisés comme gélifiants dans la préparation des plats et autres. On va dire, on utilise même chez soi tout ce qui est pectine pour les confitures et autres. Euh, la pénicilline en pharmacie, on filtre en chimie des solvants, des peintures, en agro, on filtre des engrais également pour garantir qu'il n'y reste plus dans les engrais liquides des matières en suspension qui pourraient obstruer les systèmes d'arrosage en arboriculture pour les pêchers et autres arbres fruitiers. Et un grand secteur en France, ce sont les carrières. De plus en plus, pour avoir des sables et graviers de bonne qualité, il est nécessaire de laver les graviers. Et donc, on a donc une consommation d'eau importante. Il faut recycler. Et on a également une production d'une boue qui est soit stockée dans de grandes lagunes, avec des problèmes on va dire, de conditions de stockage, de sécurité et une perte d'eau. Et donc, maintenant, de plus en plus, on met des filtres presse pour la déshydratation de ces boues. Euh, et bien entendu, en industrie minière, où là, on a deux grands secteurs d'activité. Donc, la préparation des minerais, donc c'est ce qu'on appelle le lavage après l'extraction. Souvent, le minerai est lavé pour extraire toutes les poussières, les impuretés. Donc là aussi, de très grande consommation d'eau, des problèmes de stockage de cette boue résiduelle et une perte d'eau. Et après, c'est tout ce qui est en process, on va dire, après, c'est tout ce qui est process hydrométallurgique pour le raffinage des métaux. Donc, on filtre du cobalt, du fer, du nickel et autres. Alors, donc, en quelques mots, en 2022, on était à 65 millions d'euros de chiffre d'affaires. On est 135 personnes. Le groupe total, puisqu'on fait partie du groupe Acceptance, on est 3000 personnes. Donc, le reste de l'activité, c'est des crépines de forage, entre autres pour le pétrole, le gaz avec Johnson Spring. Ce sont des systèmes de dégrillage. On peut retirer dans les prises d'eau de la feuille jusqu'à l'arbre pour les gros barrages et tout les systèmes d'aération. Donc ça, c'est en de Dieppe. On a à peu près plus de 5000 installations en service dans le monde. On est présent dans 56 pays. On va dire principalement, on va dire Amérique du Sud. On est,
On va couper le micro des gens parce que ça commence à bien faire. Can you cut your microphone, please?
Ah, putain, c'est pas ça. On avait fait une bêtise. Bon, Donc 50 SPI et on fait à peu près 150 tests de filtration par an. Donc c'est une évolution, donc création 1923, surtout dans les années 1900-1970, on en a parlé, c'est le développement des filtres presse. Et maintenant, donc on a intégré en 2013 le groupe Pilger et maintenant c'est devenu acceptance. Donc deux grandes gammes de produits. Le principal gamme, c'est le filtre presse. Et on a, s'il vous plaît, non, c'est celui du haut. S'il vous plaît, remontez. Là. Ah,
C'est lui?
Christian,
Christian Odamten. Christian Odamten.
voilà, et donc des épaississeurs. On va peut-être,
Décidément, il coupe pas son micro. Non, là, c'est bon.
pour que ça soit plus clair, je pense qu'une petite vidéo très rapide.
On va
Voilà.
pas sur Zoom, toi?
C'est un peu le son. Donc ça, c'est une application en carrière, mais c'est exactement la même chose dans tous les systèmes. Voilà. Donc, on peut imaginer être dans une mine. Donc, on a la partie extraction et concassage. Et la première étape, souvent dans ce type d'installation, c'est on a un lavage du minerai. Donc, on lave et on crible et après, ça va en broyage. Donc, le problème, c'est que vous allez récupérer à ce niveau-là une eau qui est très chargée et qu'il faut, donc on va ajouter un coagulant, un polymère, on va flocculer, on va laisser décanter l'eau. Donc, le premier appareil que l'on peut fournir, nous, ce sont ce qu'on appelle les épaississeurs, en anglais les thickeners, qui permettent de recycler quasiment instantanément une très grande partie de l'eau. Et dans le fond de ces appareils, on va récupérer, donc, avec des pompes d'extraction, on a concentré la boue. Et cette boue, jusqu'ici, la plupart des industries minières, excusez-moi, je vais aller à la fin de la vidéo. Voilà. On construit des grandes lagunes qui peuvent faire plusieurs hectares et qui présentent des dangers environnementaux, puisque souvent ce sont des stockages qui sont hors sol. Donc, on a construit des digues pour retenir ces boues. Et le problème, il y a à peu près à travers le monde un accident à 2 par an, malheureusement, où il y a une rupture de digue et donc les boues se déversent euh, et peuvent endommager toutes les installations qui se situent en dessous du stockage, et inonder des villages, polluer des rivières, etc. Parce que souvent, parfois, en industrie minière, on a des boues qui peuvent être polluées avec des métaux lourds, et donc les conséquences peuvent être euh, euh, très importantes. Donc, alors, je vais revenir en arrière, excusez-moi. OK. Là, donc, on va revenir. Là, on a la boue. Et cette boue, on va l'envoyer dans le filtre presse avec des pompes. Alors, donc là, c'est de la fermeture. On va passer un petit peu. Hop. On va passer là. Voilà. Donc, on a des plateaux qui sont évidés. Ça fait comme des moules. Quand on soulève le plateau, derrière, on a une toile qui recouvre le plateau. On a des petits drains qui permettent l'évacuation de l'eau. Et donc, la pompe va, quand on ferme le moule, on va envoyer la boue liquide dans ce moule. La toile va retenir les matières en suspension et la pompe va faire, par la montée en pression, la séparation de l'eau et des matières en suspension. Une fois qu'il n'y a plus d'eau à sortir du filtre presse, donc là, on a ici la qualité de l'eau en sortie, on retient à peu près 99% des matières en suspension. Et une fois que donc on n'a plus d'eau à sortir du filtre presse, on va passer ça, cette partie-là, on va ouvrir le filtre presse et débattir. Donc on ouvre, on sépare les plateaux. Donc et donc le gâteau tombe soit sur un convoyeur, soit sur une aire de stockage. Et après, c'est repris. Donc voilà les gâteaux. Et ça, c'est repris par des chargeurs. Une fois qu'on a fini de débattir, on referme le filtre presse et on relance un nouveau cycle. Et donc là, on a, suivant les besoins de capacité, hein, voilà. Et donc, vous voyez, on n'a plus de problème de capacité de stockage. On peut stocker en Australie, on a des stockages qui atteignent 120 mètres de haut et qui permettent des stockages en toute sécurité. Après, bon, ça c'était le petit intermède sur la présentation. On va revenir. Donc voilà toute une gamme de filtres presse, hein. On va du petit filtre presse manuel au full automatique suivant les besoins. Donc on peut faire les installations. Nous, ce que l'on fournit, on est constructeur, donc on fournit les filtres presse, les pompes et les accessoires nécessaires au bon fonctionnement du filtre presse. Par contre, on ne fait pas l'intégration, on ne fait pas le bâtiment, on ne fait pas pour installer les installations. Donc en général, donc là c'est un peu la façon dont on gère un projet. Donc on a une collecte des données, on a des quantités de produits à traiter. On fait des essais de peut-être mettre en écran. On fait des essais de filtration pour déterminer les paramètres de filtration. On conçoit le process, le dimensionnement des machines, ce qui va nous amener à pouvoir émettre une offre technico-économique après négociation. Il y a la production, le montage et la mise en service. Donc là, c'est le laboratoire. On peut, la première étape, on détermine tous les paramètres du produit. Est-ce que c'est la granulométrie, le pH, est-ce que l'on filtre en température, est-ce que l'on filtre, euh, est-ce est-ce qu'on est en zone ATEX et autres. Est-ce que c'est des bouts radioactifs et autres Après, on a des unités, donc principalement ici, celle en haut à gauche, c'est l'unité pilote de laboratoire sur laquelle on fait des essais au labo ou sur site avec le client. Et après, donc, c'est des kits que l'on peut envoyer chez le client pour faire des essais in situ et des démonstrations. Donc, on a bien entendu toutes les phases de conception des installations. Le PID automatisme, on conçoit nos propres armoires électriques et, et on fait les programmes nous-mêmes en usine. Donc là, c'est une vue partielle de notre usine de production d'assemblage des filtres presse et de nos armoires électriques. On a les supervisions montage chez nos clients, quel que soit le pays, hein. On a pas mal de références on a des références en Tunisie, Maroc et Afrique du Sud. On est très présent en Australie et en Amérique du Sud. On a des projets on va dire, en cours de développement en Afrique. Alors là, c'est plus une vue un peu de toutes les références, de tous les secteurs d'application que l'on peut avoir. Donc, alors, une des applications, c'est tout ce qui est déshydratation, gouttes, stations d'épuration urbaine, industrielle, agroalimentaire et autres. Donc là, celle de gauche, c'est un producteur de canettes pour une boisson américaine très connue. Hein, donc là, bah, la canette, en aluminium est formée, lavée, peinte, enfin, et donc bah, ça génère des eaux avec des problèmes de. Il faut traiter, recycler cette eau. Sur les stations d'épuration, donc bah, ça peut être de très grosses applications, puisque suivant la taille des villes, il peut y avoir des quantités de boue très importantes à déshydrater. Euh, la- C'était une Mineria Medialuna là, au Mexique. C'est une application, donc la mine est en pleine zone aride, donc il faut récupérer le maximum d'eau. Et tout eau que vous perdez dans les boues, bah, même si l'eau décante, enfin les boues décantent, même si vous mettez une pompe à la sortie de la lagune pour essayer de récupérer l'eau, vous perdez beaucoup d'eau par évaporation, etc. Donc on a mis en place des filtres presse. À droite, alors là, c'est une mine de diamants en Russie, donc, qui date un peu, puisque maintenant, le bureau à Moscou est malheureusement en stand-by avec avec les événements. Donc là, c'était des contraintes particulières parce qu'on est au-delà du cercle polaire. Donc il faut pouvoir, on va dire que la température extérieure est souvent inférieure à zéro, donc il faut pouvoir filtrer et déshydrater les boues. Euh, alors en Afrique, la Sassol, c'est une séparation pétrole-goudron. Là, ce sont des filtres à Tex d'application très spécifiques. Euh, et donc, que celle de droite, là, c'est une application au Chili. Alors là, c'était un client qui avait déjà exploité sa mine. Donc, il avait stocké des boues dans une lagune et en fin de compte, ces boues, jusqu'ici, n'étaient pas intéressantes, mais il y avait encore des métaux qui pouvaient être récupérés. Donc, il avait deux objectifs dépolluer la zone et, en fin de compte, en traitant les boues, il a récupéré des métaux, donc il a amorti ses coûts de dépollution. Euh, Alors, oui, au Kazakhstan, c'était des applications sur du zinc. À droite, Boskalis, c'est donc un client belge. Boskalis, DME et Yann Denul sont les trois plus gros acteurs du monde du dragage. Euh, Ils ont les plus gros bateaux pour draguer, creuser les ports, désenvaser les rivières et autres. Et donc là, c'était la dépollution d'un lac, donc Amérique du Nord, qui s'était envasé et en plus les boues étaient polluées. Une autre application possible, c'est sur tout ce qui est production de bioéthanol de deuxième génération. Là, c'est donc une application. Donc là, c'était Chemtex au Brésil à gauche, là. À droite, ben, c'est une autre référence au Mexique. Et là, c'est donc dans une étape du process, il y a donc du cyanure qui est utilisé. Hein, donc, il y a- je ne suis pas tout à fait sûr, mais c'est quasiment 95%, ça doit être de l'or. Et,
Oui, parfait.
et donc, avant la mise en décharge des boues, les boues sont filtrées, lavées pour éliminer les traces de cyanure résiduelles dans le gâteau, avant de pouvoir mettre en décharge les gâteaux. Donc là, ce sont un peu nos principaux clients et la liste est juste exhaustive.
Merci Didier. Je reprends la main là peut-être sur le truc. Si tu le partage,
Alors,
si tu l'enlèves, et puis moi je vais reprendre le son.
alors.
Normalement, vous m'entendez. Donc, tu
Alors,
as
faut
arrêté
que-
le partage, je pense? Non, pas encore. Non, tu n'as pas arrêté le partage. Donc,
Bah, tu peux pas.
en fait, il faut que tu sortes là. Alors,
Je fais une pause.
confirmer. Oh, bah, nouveau partage, reprendre. Non, c'est bon. Non. Hop. Qu'est-ce que c'est que ça? Ah oui, mais là, c'est comme. Voilà. Donc, là.
Je suis toujours
Ah oui, mais
là.
c'est toi. D'accord.
Attends.
Donc, voilà, vas-y. Alors, arrêtez le partage, tu vois. Tac.
Tac.
Voilà. Je reprends le son. Vous m'entendez là, messieurs, dames? Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Oui, on t'entend, Jean-Pierre, on t'entend.
OK. Alors, des questions pour Didier, s'il vous plaît. Donc, moi, j'ai une question parce que tu as bien présenté, je dirais, différentes applications. Avec qui, en fait, et on a bien compris que vous apportez une pièce d'un ensemble, notamment quand tu pardon, une station d'épuration. Et on sait bien que les stations d'épuration ou des mini-systèmes d'épuration, on en a
On en a
besoin.
besoin. Pour la mine, hein, oui, c'est un peu différent. Là. On peut dire station d'épuration pour les collectivités urbaines. La mine, c'est tout ce qui est plus. C'est pas tout à fait là. C'est quelque chose un peu à fin dans certains cas. Sur les mines. Là, c'est le traitement des résidus miniers. Hein, c'est la déshydratation des résidus miniers ou ce qu'on appelle le tailings de façon générale. Hein.
Mhm.
Ok.
Avec qui vous travaillez?
Alors, nous faisons toute la partie analyse, dimensionnement, conception et production des filtres à presse. Après, soit le client a sa propre engineering pour intégrer le, ces machines dans son process, ou il fait appel à des engineering classiques, type Hatch ou autres techniques. J'en oublie beaucoup, excusez-moi pour les autres. Euh, euh,
Dans le
et
secteur des mines?
oui, en général, ils sont spécialisés dans le secteur des mines. Non. Voilà. Ou
Oui.
c'est des partenaires qui achètent nos filtres presse et qui les intègrent. Enfin, c'est parfois également. Voilà.
Et quand c'est une grosse, enfin pour ma curiosité, enfin pour notre curiosité, euh, quand c'est une grosse station d'épuration, c'est aussi des ensembliers, des intégrateurs
Oui, oui, oui,
globaux, en
oui.
fait.
Oui, on travaille.
Donc, par exemple, comme Veolia,
Veolia est un client, un intégrateur.
c'est ça.
Il y a Suez, son concurrent, enfin, une partie a été rachetée, mais
Ouais,
notre politique, nous ne faisons pas d'installation clé en main au
ouais,
client final. Hein,
ouais, ouais.
nous sommes, on veut rester constructeur d'équipements.
Il faut que
Voilà.
l'intégrateur, en fait, prenne en charge ça. Ça veut
Voilà.
dire que vous avez des accords avec lui pour former ses équipes,
Oui.
pour transférer, en fait, votre savoir-faire auprès de ces gens-là.
Oui, tout à fait.
Et donc, dans le monde minier, tu as cité cette technique, mais j'imagine que pour couvrir l'Afrique, vous n'avez pas forcément identifié
Après,
des partenaires particuliers
alors,
ou c'est encore open?
sur l'Afrique, c'est totalement open.
Ouais,
C'est open. euh, on n'est pas, on va dire que c'est open sur le monde entier. On n'est pas. Une fois, on travaille avec Hatch, ou une fois c'est technique, une fois ça peut être. Il y a une multitude de sociétés. Euh,
mhm,
on travaille avec souvent l'intégrateur, l'engineering qui a été choisi par le client final. Donc ça peut être un engineering local, ça peut être un grand mondial, tout dépend de l'importance des projets et autres. Les- parce que alors, en général, sur l'industrie minière, c'est des, il y a de très gros volumes, donc en général, c'est des projets assez lourds.
Ouais.
Mais souvent, parfois, on commence par une unité pilote pour démontrer la faisabilité. Hein, donc, ça peut être une plus petite installation.
Ok.
Et parfois, bon, on va dire qu'on va de la machine de labo qui coûte 10-15 000 euros à des machines qui peuvent aller, des projets qui dépassent plusieurs millions d'euros, quoi.
Ok. Je vais reprendre la main si tu coupes aussi. Ici.
Normalement, normalement, tu as la main.
Voilà. Vous m'entendez? Il faudrait que tu coupes de ton côté.
Ah,
Je vais reprendre. Donc, merci, merci à Didier.
il y a des questions ou pas?
Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres questions?
On recherche, bien entendu. Moi, j'ai
Toi, tu
coupé.
n'as pas coupé de ton côté. Hein.
Ah, excusez-moi.
Bonjour à tous. Bonjour Jean-Pierre, vous m'entendez?
On vous entend, on vous entend.
Voilà, c'est Khadijatou Diouf
Il y a
du
une question.
Sénégal.
Ok, allez-y, allez-y.
Voilà, j'avais
Allez-y,
des
Khadija.
questions pour M. Saulnier. En
Oui.
fait, au Sénégal, bon, j'ai vu votre présentation, félicitations. C'était tellement intéressante, on a beaucoup appris. Ma question était la suivante. Moi, j'ai vu au Sénégal, il y a beaucoup de résidus euh, bon, de produits miniers, que ce soit des carrières, que ce soit des métaux, où on a vu que ce sont des montagnes. Hein. La plupart des entreprises déposent ça à l'air libre et le gouvernement sont en train de chercher des solutions sur ça. Comment faire pour que ces déchets ou bien ces résidus miniers puissent être euh, filtrés et comment faire pour protéger l'environnement, surtout la population, les gens qui habitent aux alentours des entreprises minières. Et vous, vous proposez quoi pour cette solution que voulait apporter notre gouvernement? Est-ce que votre entreprise peut aider à ces entreprises-là, minières, de pouvoir faire face à ces résidus-là?
Une réponse rapide, Didier, parce que là, sinon, on n'a pas le temps, malheureusement, d'aller au fond. Là.
Merci pour les compliments. Nous savons traiter les résidus les, les liquides, tout ce qui est pompable. Si ce sont des résidus déjà secs, ce n'est pas dans notre domaine de compétence. Par contre, il y a beaucoup d'industries qui sont illégales, qui ont justement des résidus, qui ont fait des barrages, qui ont creusé des trous, qui ont stocké des bouts, ces résidus liquides. Et nous pouvons vous accompagner, soit vous, soit au travers un partenaire, soit directement avec les clients, soit avec l'État. On peut proposer nos technologies euh, pour résoudre ce problème-là. Par rapport aux préférences, à la question qui était sur les références, on a Diem existant depuis 1923, on a de très nombreuses références
Dans les mines.
dans les mines. On est dans on va dire dans le top 5
Des suppliers.
des fournisseurs.
Des fournisseurs.
Des suppliers. Hein. Et donc, on va dire à peu près, on a plus de, si on remonte depuis l'origine, on a plus de 7000 références au total, et la mine représente plus de 60% de notre activité. Donc, voilà.
Ok. Alors, merci beaucoup, Didier. on va passer. Alors, c'est vrai que il nous reste normalement 1 minute avant le démarrage des rendez-vous. Je voudrais savoir si Cynthia est là pour intervenir. Donc, est-ce qu'elle nous a rejoint? Is Cynthia there for the presentation? Or okay, so if Cynthia is not there, because I don't see her. Andre, we said that you could say something about the opportunities that you that are identified for entrepreneurs, partners, investors at ET Raw Materials. Could you say a word like this, on this in 5 minutes, no more?
I think so. Thank you. Okay. I think the interesting thing that an organization like EAT can do also in Africa is to generate, let's say, innovation through a network. So just to briefly explain the setup, so EAT Raw Materials is a network organization. That means we connect industry and research and academia. And industry includes the big players, but also, let's say, SMEs and startups. And startups are quite a central role. So this is, I should add, for looking at Europe at the moment, because the E, of course, in EAT stands for Europe. And so what it works is that innovation, for instance, we have different, let's say, methods or instruments to promote innovation. And one of the, I think, key vehicles is that is the so-called Open Innovation Challenge, where, for example, let's say a mining company has a specific technical problem, let's say with regard to wastewater management or reproduction of metals contained in tailing, and they could, for instance, request a project.
We lost you.
Oh, since when? Am I back?
No, Jean-Pierre, we can hear him. No problem.
Okay.
Go ahead, Andre. Go ahead.
Okay. So in this case, and I make a concrete case because Eramet is also a French company, so maybe you have more relations to them. They were requesting basically a technical solution to water treatment. And then we set out a project where startups can apply, present their solution. We have different rounds, semi-final and a final. These are pitching events. And the winning proposal then gets funded to basically run a proof of concept with Eramet. And for example, these Open Innovation Challenge, as we call it, can be run once or twice a year. I think that the next one has been set up at a mining event in Finland, which took place last week and which was run by Mining Finland, which is like Business France, but for Finland and on the mining sector. But in general, it's open to anyone. And I think the good thing is that we really promote, let's say, innovation where there is a direct market request and where we can directly link startups or innovators with industry. And by this, basically guarantee that innovation is not, being done because some smart brains think this is useful, but because there's a real demand for it. And we also have, let's say, other tools like upscaling and Jumpstarter tools where we fund specific startups or innovative companies with seed funding. We also work through equity, etc. And we do similar things in the education sector. At the moment, as I said, this is predominantly we're looking at Europe because that's just our mandate. But for example, one of the last year's Open Innovation Challenge winners that was artificial intelligence in asset maintenance is also operating in Senegal in a mine. I don't know exactly which one, but let's say the outcomes of such challenges are globally available. For us, a bit the challenge is how can we get into the African markets? We also need to discuss that internally because, of course, everything structures are a bit different. But I think the first case will hopefully happen in Namibia, where we are in contact also with the European Commission. Then again, basically in supporting the implementation of the roadmap, of the partnership roadmap. So I hope that this type of partnership innovation that we can also transplant it and then maybe start building a network of African partners to promote similar things. But I have to be honest and clear that we are really at the beginning here concerning Africa, but I think it would be a useful opportunity.